In 1876, Los Angeles was a small town of barely 10,000 people. Within a century, it would become the sprawling capital of suburbia. How did a dusty settlement far from the centers of power transform into the most famous suburban landscape in the world? The answer begins with land, ambition, and a promise of sunshine. Los Angeles in the late 19th century was not yet the city we imagine today. It was a frontier town, surrounded by ranchos and farmland. The Spanish and Mexican periods had left behind large land grants, and after the U.S. took California in 1848, those lands became the foundation for speculation. Wealthy families and newcomers saw opportunity. The climate was mild, the soil fertile, and the horizon seemed endless. But there was a problem. Los Angeles was isolated. It had no major port, no easy rail connection, and no national reputation. To grow, it needed more than land. It needed a story. Enter the boosters. These were businessmen, journalists, and civic leaders who believed Los Angeles could become a great city. They wrote pamphlets, placed ads in newspapers across the Midwest, and painted Los Angeles as a paradise. Sunshine, health, and opportunity were their selling points. One of the most influential boosters was Harrison Gray Otis, publisher of the Los Angeles Times. He used his newspaper to promote the city relentlessly. Another was Henry Huntington, who would later build the streetcar empire that carried thousands into new suburbs. Together, these men and others created a narrative. Los Angeles was not just a town, it was the future. The turning point came in 1876 when the Southern Pacific Railroad completed its line to Los Angeles. Suddenly, the city was connected to the rest of the country. Migrants could arrive more easily and goods could be shipped out. This connection sparked the first real land boom. Speculators bought large tracts, divided them into smaller lots, and sold them to newcomers. Subdivisions began to appear on the edges of town. Streets were laid out, often in grids, and houses were built quickly. The dream of suburban living, space, privacy, and ownership was taking root. The most dramatic early boom came in the 1880s. A rate war between railroads made travel to Los Angeles cheap. Tickets from the Midwest could cost as little as $1. Thousands poured in, and land sales exploded. In 1887 alone, more than 50,000 people arrived. Towns sprang up overnight. Pasadena, Monrovia, and dozens of other communities were founded during this frenzy. Many lots were sold before houses were built. Some buyers never intended to live there. They only wanted to profit from resale. This boom collapsed within a year, but the pattern was set. Los Angeles would grow through cycles of speculation, expansion, and consolidation. Each wave pushed the city outward, creating new suburbs. Here lies the first controversy. Was this growth natural, or was it manipulated? Boosters exaggerated the climate, downplayed the challenges of water supply, and promised prosperity to all. Many settlers found hardship instead. Yet the dream persisted. The suburban ideal, owning a home on a plot of land away from the crowded city, was powerful. It appealed to families, to migrants seeking health, and to investors chasing profit. Los Angeles became a laboratory for this dream. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, many Los Angeles subdivisions included restrictive covenants in their property deeds. These covenants explicitly barred non-white residents, most often African Americans, Mexican Americans, Asian Americans, and Jewish families, from purchasing or occupying homes. Developers and real estate agents promoted these restrictions as a way to protect property values and maintain what they called desirable neighborhoods. This practice was not unique to Los Angeles, but it was especially widespread there, shaping the racial geography of the city for decades. Even after the Supreme Court ruled in Shelley v. Kramer, 1948, that such covenants could not be legally enforced, informal discrimination continued. These early restrictions laid the foundation for the stark racial segregation that became a defining feature of Los Angeles suburbs in the 20th century. During the land boom of the 1880s, developers often advertised Los Angeles as a paradise of abundance, using orange groves as a symbol of prosperity and health. Promotional materials showed endless rows of citrus trees, suggesting that newcomers could enjoy both suburban living and agricultural wealth. In reality, many of these groves were planted not for farming, but for marketing. Developers would establish small orchards near new subdivisions to attract buyers, creating the illusion of fertile land and endless opportunity. While some citrus farms were profitable, especially in areas like Riverside and San Bernardino, many groves around Los Angeles were unsustainable due to water shortages and soil limitations. The image of the orange grove became more of a selling point than a reliable livelihood, reinforcing the booster narrative rather than reflecting everyday reality. The land boom of the 1880s was one of the most dramatic in Los Angeles history. Fueled by cheap railroad fares and aggressive promotion, thousands of newcomers bought lots in newly platted towns across Southern California. But when the boom collapsed in 1888, many of these subdivisions were abandoned. Streets had been laid out, lots sold, and advertisements printed, but houses were never built. Some areas became ghost towns with empty plots and unused infrastructure. For example, towns such as San Fernando and Ontario saw periods of stagnation after the boom, while others disappeared entirely from maps. It often took decades before these areas were revived in later waves of growth, especially after water projects and freeway construction made them viable again. The ghost towns of the 1880s serve as reminders that suburban expansion was not always smooth. It was marked by cycles of speculation, collapse, and rebirth. The seeds of suburban sprawl had been planted, but the question remained: could Los Angeles sustain this growth, or would it collapse under its own ambition? Suburban sprawl in Los Angeles was not accidental. It was engineered. Boosters, railroads, and speculators created a system that encouraged outward growth. The controversies of exclusion, speculation, and sustainability were present from the very beginning. Los Angeles was not simply growing, it was being designed to sprawl. By 1900, Los Angeles had more than 100,000 residents. Suburbs were spreading outward, and boosters continued to promise paradise. But beneath the optimism was fear. The city's water resources were already strained. Wells were drying, and the river could not meet demand. If Los Angeles wanted to grow, it needed a new source of water. This was not just about survival, it was about ambition. Civic leaders envisioned Los Angeles as the great city of the West. To achieve that, they needed water to fuel homes, farms, and industries. The search began. The central figure in this story was William Mulholland, chief engineer of the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Mulholland was a self-taught engineer, a man of immense confidence and determination. He believed Los Angeles could secure its future by tapping distant sources of water. Mulholland's vision was bold: build an aqueduct to carry water from the Owens Valley more than 200 miles away, across deserts and mountains, into Los Angeles. It would be one of the largest engineering projects of its time. The Owens Valley was a fertile agricultural region in eastern California. Farmers there depended on the Owens River to irrigate crops. When Los Angeles agents began quietly buying land and water rights, many locals felt betrayed. They believed they were selling to ranchers or investors, not to a city that intended to divert their lifeblood. By 1905, Los Angeles had secured enough rights to begin construction. The aqueduct project was announced, and Owens Valley residents realized the scale of what was happening. Their water was being taken to fuel Los Angeles growth. This sparked one of the greatest controversies in California history. Owens Valley farmers fought back, staging protests and later acts of sabotage against the aqueduct. But Los Angeles had the political power, the money, and the determination. Work began in 1908. Thousands of laborers were hired to dig tunnels, build siphons, and lay concrete. The project stretched across deserts and mountains, requiring immense skill and endurance. In 1913, the aqueduct was completed. Water flowed into Los Angeles, greeted by cheering crowds. Mulholland famously declared, "There it is, take it." This moment was celebrated as a triumph. Los Angeles now had the resource it needed to grow. Suburbs could expand without fear of drought. Developers could promise water to every new home. The aqueduct was more than an engineering feat. It was a symbol of power. Los Angeles had proven it could reshape nature to serve its ambitions, but it also revealed the darker side of suburban sprawl. Growth came at the expense of others. Owens Valley was left dry, its farms ruined, its communities weakened. This controversy raised questions that still echo. Who benefits from growth? Who pays the price? In Los Angeles, the answer was clear. The city gained, while distant communities lost. The aqueduct was financed largely through bonds approved by Los Angeles voters. Many residents saw it as an investment in their own prosperity. Owens Valley farmers staged dramatic acts of resistance. In the 1920s, they dynamited portions of the aqueduct trying to reclaim their water. These acts were called the California Water Wars. Mulholland's reputation was later tarnished by the St. Francis Dam disaster in 1928, when a dam he designed collapsed, killing more than 400 people. But his role in securing water for Los Angeles remained central to the city's identity. With water secured, Los Angeles entered a new phase. Suburbs spread faster, developers promised green lawns and citrus groves, and families flocked to new communities. But the tension was clear. Growth was built on a fragile foundation. The city had taken water from others, and it would need to keep finding new sources as it expanded. The aqueduct solved one problem, but created another: dependence on distant resources. Los Angeles was now locked into a cycle of expansion that demanded more and more. Water was the key to suburban sprawl. Without the aqueduct, Los Angeles could not have grown into the vast metropolis we know. But the price was high. Owens Valley was sacrificed, and the controversy revealed the moral cost of ambition. Los Angeles had secured its future, but at the expense of others. The dream of suburban paradise was built on conflict. In the early 20th century, Los Angeles was a streetcar city. Henry Huntington, nephew of railroad magnate Collis H. Huntington, built the Pacific Electric Railway, known as the Red Cars. By 1911, it was the largest interurban railway system in the world, with more than 1,000 miles of track. The Red Cars connected downtown Los Angeles to suburbs like Pasadena, Long Beach, and San Fernando Valley. Families could live in quiet neighborhoods and commute to the city for work or shopping. Developers built new subdivisions along the lines, advertising easy access to the city. This was the first wave of suburban sprawl. The streetcar made it possible to live outside the city center while still being connected. But another force was rising: the automobile. By the 1920s, cars were becoming affordable for middle-class families. The Model T, mass-produced by Ford, changed everything. Suddenly, people were no longer tied to fixed rail lines. They could live farther out, in areas not served by streetcars. Los Angeles embraced the car more than any other city. Its wide streets, flat terrain, and sprawling layout made driving easy. Families began to prefer the freedom of the automobile over the schedules of streetcars. The decline of the Pacific Electric system was gradual but inevitable. As cars became popular, ridership fell. Developers built new suburbs without streetcar connections, assuming residents would drive. By the 1940s, the system was struggling. Maintenance costs were high and revenues were low. In 1951, the Pacific Electric sold its passenger operations to Metropolitan Coach Lines, which began replacing streetcars with buses. By the 1960s, the red cars were gone. This shift marked a turning point. Los Angeles was no longer a streetcar city. It was becoming a freeway city. The freeway era began in the 1930s with the construction of the Arroyo Seco Parkway, the first modern freeway in the United States. It connected downtown Los Angeles to Pasadena. After World War II, freeway construction exploded. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 provided funding for interstate highways, and Los Angeles seized the opportunity. Freeways were built across the city, linking suburbs to downtown and to each other. The Hollywood Freeway, the Santa Monica Freeway, the San Diego Freeway, each became a symbol of modernity. Families could live miles away from the city center and still commute quickly. The automobile promised freedom. Families could choose where to live, shop, and work. Suburbs flourished, offering larger homes and more space. But this freedom came with control. Freeways dictated the shape of the city. Neighborhoods were destroyed to make way for construction. Communities were divided by concrete barriers. The car became not just a tool of mobility, but a force that reshaped social and physical landscapes. The Pacific Electric Railway was not just a transportation system, it was a real estate strategy. Henry Huntington built lines to land he owned, increasing its value and selling it to developers. The decline of streetcars was accelerated by corporate interests. Companies like General Motors, Firestone Tire, and Standard Oil were accused of conspiring to dismantle streetcar systems nationwide, replacing them with buses and promoting car use. This became known as the Great American Streetcar Scandal. Early freeways were celebrated as tourist attractions. People would drive them simply for the thrill of modern engineering. By the 1950s, Los Angeles was fully committed to the automobile. Freeways stretched across the region, suburbs expanded rapidly, and the city's identity was cemented as the car capital. But tension was rising. Traffic congestion grew worse, pollution increased, communities were displaced. The promise of freedom was shadowed by the costs of dependence. Transportation was the engine of suburban sprawl. Streetcars created the first suburbs, but automobiles and freeways unleashed a new scale of expansion. Los Angeles became the model of car-centered growth, admired by some and criticized by others. The city had chosen its path. It would sprawl outward, driven by the automobile. The dream of Los Angeles suburbia was never offered to everyone. It was carefully guarded, shaped by race and class. By the mid-20th century, Los Angeles had water to drink, cars to drive, and freeways to connect its sprawling neighborhoods. But behind the promise of suburban paradise lay exclusion. Who could live in these new communities? Who was kept out? This chapter explores the boundaries of suburbia, how race, class, and policy determined who belonged, and how those decisions left lasting scars. The suburban ideal was simple: a house, a yard, and a safe neighborhood. For many families, it represented success and stability. But in Los Angeles, access to this dream was not equal. Developers, banks, and governments created systems that favored white middle-class families. African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and poorer residents faced barriers. Suburbia was not just about land and houses, it was about identity, privilege, and exclusion. One of the most powerful tools of exclusion was the restrictive covenant. These were clauses written into property deeds that prohibited the sale of homes to non-white buyers. They were common in Los Angeles suburbs from the early 1900s through the 1940s. Neighborhoods advertised themselves as restricted, meaning only white families could live there. This practice shaped communities across the city, ensuring that suburbs remained racially homogeneous. In 1948, the Supreme Court ruled in Shelley v. Kramer that courts could not enforce racial covenants, but the practice continued informally. Real estate agents and homeowners associations found ways to maintain segregation. Another force was redlining. In the 1930s, the federal government created maps to guide mortgage lending. Neighborhoods with minority populations were marked in red, considered high risk. Banks refused to issue loans there, while white suburbs received favorable terms. This policy locked minority families out of suburban homeownership. It reinforced segregation and widened the wealth gap. In Los Angeles, redlining shaped the geography of opportunity. White families built equity in suburban homes, while minority families were confined to underfunded urban neighborhoods. Mexican Americans faced particular challenges. Many lived in barrios near downtown in overcrowded housing with limited services. When freeways were built, these communities were often targeted for demolition. The construction of the Santa Ana Freeway, for example, displaced thousands of Mexican-American families. Suburban expansion came at their expense. At the same time, Mexican Americans were largely excluded from new suburbs. Restrictive covenants and discriminatory lending kept them out. The suburban dream was visible but unreachable. African Americans migrated to Los Angeles in large numbers during World War II, seeking jobs in defense industries. They settled in neighborhoods like Watts in South Central. But when they tried to move into suburbs, they faced resistance. White homeowners organized to block sales. Violence and intimidation were used to enforce boundaries. In some cases, African American families who bought homes in white suburbs were harassed until they left. This exclusion reinforced segregation. African Americans were confined to certain neighborhoods, while suburbs remained overwhelmingly white. Asian Americans also faced barriers. Laws dating back to the early 20th century had prohibited land ownership by Japanese immigrants. Even after those laws were repealed, discrimination continued. During World War II, Japanese Americans were forcibly removed from Los Angeles and sent to internment camps. After the war, many struggled to reclaim property or find housing. Suburbs were largely closed to them. The boundaries of suburbia were not just physical, they were social and cultural. Suburbs were marketed as safe, clean, and white. They represented a particular vision of American identity. For those excluded, the message was clear: suburbia was not for you. This created deep divisions in Los Angeles, shaping the city's racial geography for generations. Some Los Angeles suburbs advertised themselves as sundown towns, meaning minorities were not welcome after dark. Developers often used landscaping and architecture to signal exclusivity. Wide lawns, uniform houses, and controlled aesthetics reinforced the image of order and homogeneity. In some cases, minority families who managed to buy homes in suburbs found themselves isolated, with children facing hostility in schools and parents excluded from community organizations. By the 1950s, Los Angeles suburbs were thriving. Families enjoyed spacious homes, schools, and shopping centers. But the tension was undeniable. Entire communities were excluded, confined to urban neighborhoods with fewer resources. The promise of suburbia was built on inequality. The dream was selective, and the boundaries were enforced through law, policy, and social pressure. Suburban sprawl was not just about land and transportation, it was about race and class. The dream of Los Angeles suburbia was deliberately restricted. It offered prosperity to some while denying it to others. This exclusion shaped the city's identity. Los Angeles became a symbol of suburban success, but also of segregation and inequality. By mid-century, Los Angeles suburbs were thriving. Families moved into single-family homes with lawns, garages, and schools nearby. Shopping centers replaced downtown streets as the heart of commerce. Freeways connected everything, making mobility easy. This was more than geography, it was culture. Suburban life created new patterns of community, leisure, and identity. The suburban house became the central symbol of success. Developers built tract homes, rows of similar houses, affordable for middle-class families. The most famous example was Lakewood, developed in the early 1950s. More than 17,000 homes were built in less than 3 years, creating one of the largest planned communities in the nation. For families, owning a home meant stability. It was a place to raise children, a mark of achievement, and a step into the middle class. The house was not just shelter, it was identity. Suburban sprawl changed commerce. Instead of downtown shopping districts, families flocked to suburban shopping centers. Lakewood Center, opened in 1951, was one of the largest malls in the country and featured spaces for civic gatherings. These centers became the new town squares of suburban life, replacing traditional downtowns. They hosted school events, community meetings, and social activities, reinforcing the sense of belonging in suburban neighborhoods. This design reflected the cultural shift of suburban sprawl, Commerce, leisure, and community life were all integrated into the suburban landscape. Suburban life emphasized leisure. Families enjoyed backyards, barbecues, and local parks. Drive-in theaters became popular, offering entertainment tailored to car culture. The beach also became part of suburban identity. With freeways, families could easily reach coastal areas. Surfing, sunbathing, and beach culture became symbols of Los Angeles life. Suburban sprawl created a new identity for Los Angeles. It was no longer just a city, it was a collection of communities, each with its own character. Families felt a sense of belonging, tied to their neighborhoods, schools, and shopping centers. But this identity was selective. It celebrated middle-class prosperity while excluding those left behind. Suburban culture reinforced divisions, shaping who belonged and who did not. Lakewood, developed in the early 1950s in southeast Los Angeles County, became famous for its speed of construction. Developers used assembly line methods inspired by wartime production. Teams of specialized workers performed the same task repeatedly. One crew poured foundations, another installed plumbing, another framed walls. This system allowed entire houses to be completed in just a few days. At the peak of construction, more than 40 homes were finished daily. The scale was unprecedented. Over 17,000 houses were built in less than 3 years. Lakewood symbolized the efficiency of post-war suburban development and demonstrated how industrial techniques could be applied to housing. It also showed how suburban sprawl was not just organic growth, but carefully engineered expansion. By the 1950s, Los Angeles had more than 60 drive-in theaters, making it one of the nation's leaders in this form of entertainment. Drive-ins reflected the city's deep embrace of car culture. Families could enjoy movies without leaving their vehicles. Teenagers found them to be popular social spaces, and the theaters themselves became landmarks of suburban life. The rise of drive-ins was tied directly to suburban sprawl. As families moved farther from downtown, drive-ins offered convenient local entertainment. They also reinforced the identity of Los Angeles as a city where the automobile was not just transportation, but a way of life. Shopping centers in suburban Los Angeles were more than places to buy goods. They were designed as community spaces. Developers often included auditoriums, meeting halls, and recreational areas. Lakewood Center, opened in 1951, was one of the largest malls in the country and featured spaces for civic gatherings. These centers became the new town squares of suburban life, replacing traditional downtowns. They hosted school events, community meetings, and social activities, reinforcing the sense of belonging in suburban neighborhoods. This design reflected the cultural shift of suburban sprawl. Commerce, leisure, and community life were all integrated into the suburban landscape. By the 1960s, suburban culture was firmly established. Families enjoyed prosperity, but tensions simmered. Segregation persisted, traffic worsened, and environmental concerns grew. The suburban dream was strong, but cracks were appearing. Los Angeles was celebrated as the city of the future. Families enjoyed homes, lawns, and freeways. Developers promised endless opportunity. But beneath the optimism lay challenges. The environment was fragile, infrastructure was stretched, and the identity of the city was shifting. The consequences of sprawl were not immediate. They built slowly, layer by layer, until they defined the city itself. Sprawl transformed the natural landscape. Hills were leveled, wetlands drained, and farmland converted into subdivisions. Wildlife habitats disappeared as suburbs spread across valleys and plains. Air quality became a major issue. The rise of automobiles created smog, a thick haze that blanketed the city. By the 1950s, Los Angeles was infamous for its pollution. Children were kept indoors on smoggy days, and health concerns grew. Water use also increased. Lawns, swimming pools, and suburban growth demanded more water than the aqueducts could supply. Los Angeles turned to new sources, including the Colorado River, deepening its dependence on distant resources. Sprawl demanded infrastructure: roads, sewers, electricity, schools. Each new suburb required investment. The city struggled to keep pace. Freeways became congested, schools overcrowded, and services stretched thin. Public transportation declined. With the end of the streetcars, buses served some areas, but most families relied on cars. Traffic jams became a daily reality. The promise of mobility was shadowed by frustration. Sprawl reshaped the identity of Los Angeles. It became the freeway metropolis, defined by cars and suburbs. The city was admired for its modernity, but criticized for its lack of cohesion. Unlike older cities with dense centers, Los Angeles was decentralized. It was a collection of suburbs, each with its own character. This gave residents freedom, but made the city feel fragmented. The consequences of sprawl revealed the costs of choices made earlier. Water projects had enabled growth but created dependence. Automobiles had offered freedom but caused pollution and congestion. Suburbs had promised prosperity but reinforced segregation and inequality. Los Angeles had achieved its dream, but at a price. Smog in Los Angeles was first documented in the early 1940s when residents began noticing a thick brown haze that stung the eyes and made breathing difficult. At first, scientists struggled to identify its cause. Some believed it was smoke from factories, while others blamed dust from the surrounding desert. It wasn't until the late 1940s that researchers, including Dr. Ari Hagensmith at Caltech, linked the phenomenon to automobile emissions. He demonstrated that car exhaust, when exposed to sunlight, produced photochemical smog. This discovery was groundbreaking, as it revealed that the very technology fueling suburban expansion, the automobile, was also creating one of the city's greatest environmental challenges. By the 1950s, Los Angeles had become infamous worldwide for its smog, a direct consequence of suburban sprawl and car dependency. In the mid-20th century, some suburban planners experimented with green belts, areas of open space meant to preserve nature and limit unchecked development. These ideas were inspired by planning movements in Europe, particularly in Britain, where green belts were used to separate cities from countryside. In Los Angeles, developers occasionally set aside land for parks, golf courses, or landscaped buffers between subdivisions. However, most of these green belts were quickly consumed by new waves of housing and commercial development. The pressure for growth was too strong and land values too high for open space to remain untouched. While a few parks and recreational areas survived, the larger vision of green belts as permanent barriers to sprawl largely failed in Los Angeles. One of the overlooked aspects of suburban expansion was the hidden cost of infrastructure. Developers built homes quickly and cheaply, often focusing only on the structures themselves. Roads, schools, sewer systems, and utilities were left to be funded by local governments and taxpayers. This created long-term financial burdens for communities. Suburbs required constant investment to maintain services, and as they spread farther from the city center, the costs grew. Freeways in particular demanded enormous public spending, while developers reaped profits from home sales. This imbalance meant that the true cost of suburban living was not reflected in the price of a house, it was carried by the public. Over time, these hidden costs strained budgets and contributed to debates about whether sprawl was sustainable. By the 1960s, Los Angeles faced a paradox. It was the symbol of suburban success, yet it struggled with pollution, congestion, and inequality. The dream was real, but so were the consequences.